Hello, welcome. I'm glad you joined us again. As always, I recommend you listen to the other videos to kind of get an idea of what we're doing here and why. But we are going to start lesson 8, Genesis 5 and 6. We're going to cover both chapters because there's a lot of names in Genesis 5, but we'll get through them pretty quickly and then we'll get into some of the meaning before we get to Noah. So let's jump right in and read Genesis chapter 5. It's the one without all the names, so this is fun. Little hint too, when you're reading names in the Bible, no one else knows how to pronounce them, so just go fast and you're fine. They won't correct you. There's like one person maybe, but that's about it. So let's jump right into Genesis chapter 5. This is the written account of the descendants of Adam. When God created human beings, he made them to be like himself. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and called them human. When Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him in his very image. He named his son Seth. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. When Seth was 105 years old, he became the father of Enosh. After the birth of Enosh, Seth lived another 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Seth lived 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh was 90 years old, he became the father of Kenan. After the birth of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan was 70 years old, he became the father of Mahalalel. The birth of Mahalalel, Kenan lived another 840 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Kenan lived 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel was 65 years old, he became the father of Jared. Now, if your name is Mahalalel and you name your kid Jared, I think it's because you're trying to pronounce your name. It's just my theory. Uh, so Mahalalel lived another 830 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Mahalalel lived 895 years, and then he died. When Jared was 162 years old, he became the father of Enoch. After the birth of Enoch, Jared lived another 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Jared lived 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch was 65 years old, he became the father of Methuselah. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years. And one of the reasons we want to skip this is because the names are hard to pronounce, but the reason it's important is because we get names and we get connections that really matter later on. We're building a foundation here. Then one day he disappeared because God took him. So he just disappeared. So when Methuselah was 187 years old, he became the father of Lamech. And Lamech is a big player here. So after the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived another 782 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Methuselah lived 969 years, and then he died. When Lamech was 182 years old, he became the father of Lamech. He became the father of a son. Lamech named his son Noah. For he said, "May he bring us relief from our work and the painful labor of farming the ground that this Lord has cursed." So after all of that time, the ground was cursed. They were having to work it. Remember what God said after Cain and Abel. And so he has this son Noah, and he thinks, wow, Noah might be able to rescue all of us. So Lamech lived another 595 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Lamech lived 777 years. Numbers are important in the Bible. And then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Adam was 130 years old when Shet was born. And remember, Adam and Eve were created as fully formed human beings. They didn't have to grow up and then meet, marry, and then have kids. They were ready from day one. This is also important when somebody says, well, how do we know the earth is a million years old when the Bible says it's thousands of years old? It's like, remember, the earth was formed. When it was formed, it was completely set. Uh, it didn't create and then grow over millions of years. It may have been created millions of years old. We don't know. But since Adam and Eve were, we can assume that maybe the earth was too. Now, Noah was in Chet's line. So even though Noah was 500 years old, obviously he had other kids, but this is the one that's significant. So that's why it's listed here. Also, remember the Bible is not a day-to-day journey, a journal of everything that happened. There's some things mentioned, and there's millions of other things that are not mentioned. So he had other kids. He would have contributed to the world's population a lot by that point. But God set apart, divided, elected, and separated all of Noah's offspring from all of humanity. And this is really vital. It's a Bible fundamental principle that we have to get. God elects, separates, and divides us. That's the way he's done it from day one. That's the way he's going to do it all the way to the end. He separates. And this is what he's doing here. He's showing us he's taking all of Noah's family and separating them away from the rest of humanity, because the flood is going to take everybody else out. So that's chapter 5. Let's read chapter 6. But God remembered Noah. I'm sorry. That's not it. Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was constantly and totally evil. Imagine. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart, and the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the large animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I ever made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on the earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. Noah was the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now God saw that the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. God observed all this corruption in the world, for everyone on earth was corrupt. So God said to Noah, I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have all filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them out along with the earth. Build a large boat from cypress wood and waterproof it with tar, inside and out. Then construct decks and stalls throughout its interior. Make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Leave an 18-inch opening below the roof of all around the boat. Put the door on the side and build 3 decks inside the boat, lower, middle, and upper. Look, I'm about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die, but I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, onto the boat and keep with you to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you and be kept alive. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. So Noah did everything exactly as God commanded him. So this is where versions become really, really important, because when you're reading the New Living Translation, you see certain things that you miss if you don't read the complete Jewish Bible or the direct translation. Every translation is different, and some are literal word for word, and some of them are concept. Some of them are paraphrases, like the Message version. So I like to go to different versions so you kind of see some of the things that are happening that maybe you didn't see in the New Living Translation. One of the things that it says in the New Living Translation is, look, I'm about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die. But when you read it in the literal translation, it says, then I myself will bring the flood of water over the earth to destroy from under heaven every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will be destroyed. So every living thing that breathes is important, because that meant fish were not included. Things that had to live on land for an extended amount of time were killed, but things that didn't were not. It doesn't seem like a big deal right now, but as we read, as we go through the Bible, translations matter because there is an agenda to take out some of the Jewishness. And the NIV is probably one of the worst translations, but they all have their problems, even the complete Jewish Bible. But that's just the first of many translation things that I'm going to talk about. So the sons of God that they mention, in Hebrew, that is B'nai Elohim. And Elohim is just a phrase that means like the chief God, the main God. The El is like the main person. It's a lot like our word for God. It's not his formal name. It is an office, so to speak. So I think they were probably some kind of high-ranking spiritual being. B'nai Elohim were given charge over nations of the earth too. Most people don't even know this because they didn't read Daniel and they don't know some of these things. But we run into these so-called Prince of Persia in the book of Daniel. So they had some sort of power over that particular nation. Nephilim was a play on the word Nephal, which means fallen or to fall upon. It doesn't mean giant. We've changed that meaning to make it sound that way, but the sense of the word is to die, to be cast down to the earth like a grave. They were a race of something different, an evil kind of difference. They represented a joining together of the worst of the spiritual world with the worst of the physical world. The idea was that fallen angels took on human form, mated and created giants called Nephilim. Sons of God was a designation for the line of Seth too, the line of faithful, godly men. They were living the way God wanted them to live. The daughters of men represented the line of Cain, those who fell away from God. So that's why those phrases are used. And some things are like Hebrewisms. It's like in America, we would say, don't let the cat out of the bag. If somebody else from someplace else is like, why do you have a cat in the bag? Well, that's not what it actually means. That's just kind of the way we see it. And the reason this is important is because sometimes we miss the meaning here when we start thinking of giants and stuff like that. It's really important to know the context. So, were they actually giants? We really don't know. These people turned themselves over to Satan and gained great power. So they were able to do some amazing things, but their power came from evil, not good. That wasn't God-given power. It was Satan-given power. So when we read descriptions of the Antichrist, then we find out it's Satan who is the source of his power. So this was a theme. This is not an analogy. And verse 3 speaks about God's Spirit. In Hebrew, it's the Ruach HaKodesh, not striving with man forever. His Spirit can't deal with men very long because we're evil. The Holy Spirit is that attribute of God that deals with man, that Ruach HaKodesh. And I'll say that a lot. You'll get to learn that word. But God doesn't promise not to shower his wrath on people, his divine judgment on the godly along with the godless. He doesn't promise that. For some reason we think it, but it's not in the Bible. We're told that he was Tzaddik, which is Hebrew for righteous. He was also Tamamim, which is blameless. This is where the Hebrew words really matter. The Torah teaching is about holiness. One of the attributes of holiness is wholeness, completeness, no deficiencies, no blemishes, so to speak. Shem will be a settled apart line of people too. We'll get to that. God's creation has already decayed in just a few generations. And in verse 13, everything God gave life is at fault. He doesn't blame Satan. He blames man and animals. If evil was there from the beginning, then God must have created evil. It's a duality, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. But we see an interesting God's principle. Nothing is left for Noah to do but to accept God's means of salvation. and following it exactly as he says, not a different way, but his way. God's role is to provide it, and mankind's role is to accept it. Noah and his family had to believe what God was telling them first, that mankind was evil and that God would soon destroy them, because they had no basis for this necessarily. And second, that there is a means of escape. They have to believe that it exists, and then they have to accept it. And that's the way it is for us too. That we have to accept there is one and there's only one. That's the way God provided it. And then Noah has to act. They have to actually do something with that information. So in Hebrew, and this is, I think, really interesting, the word ark is a tiva. And a tiva is the same word that is used to describe Moses when he is put into the water as a baby to be protected. And a tiva is kind of a box-like craft. It doesn't have a rudder, it doesn't have a crew. It's just something that's meant to navigate a waterway. And that's exactly what Moses had. Same word. The idea is that a tiva is guided by God's hand and his decision and his will. Mankind's just a passenger. So each species or family is represented by one male and one female. This is the basic biblical family unit. That's how God created it. In the narrative Noah's Ark, we get marriage being a permanent bonding and marriage being monogamous. One man, one woman. One male, one female. And food was the plant. So God defined food in the first chapter. We heard that. Anyone who has a child has watched them eat dirt because it's there. But we tell them not to because dirt's not food. God determined what was food, and that's all that was food. Not anything we can eat, but what God says is food. And that's the point of God defining what his people may eat, because when he uses the term food, it's based on what he said was food, not what we say is food. And it means that God has a sign for what men and women are supposed to eat. So the last line of that is one of the best in the Bible, where it says, Noah did everything that God commanded him, exactly the way he was told to do it. And that's important because he didn't have basis for a lot of this. He didn't understand a lot of this either. They had never had a flood. There was no body of water around Noah. So he did all of this based on faith. My question is, are we willing to do the same? Are we willing to study the Bible from a new perspective, assuming we don't already know all the stories? God bless. We'll talk to you soon. Hit that subscribe and like button and share this with a friend.